Hi listeners, Jason here. Well, it's that time of year again where the team breaks for Christmas holidays. We hope you have enjoyed listening along to some amazing guests sharing from their considerable subject matter expertise. While there will be a 3-week hiatus from new episodes, we have you covered with 6 Christmas replay episodes. These are 6 of the most downloaded and popular episodes from 2022, including this one. If you haven't heard this episode yet, you're in for a treat. If you have already, it's probably worth a re-listen. Now, while I've got your attention, I'll be delivering a series of in-person workshops in London, Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne in January and February. These sessions will help you to incorporate psychological health and safety into a holistic approach to workplace mental health that prevents harm, promotes flourishing, and responds to ill health. That's it for announcements. Now on to this special Christmas replay episode.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason Banshee, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joel Mitchell. How today, Joel?
Well, I'm excited because December is upon us. And it might come as a shock to our listeners to hear that I'm a Christmas person.
It was a shock to all of us in the office, I've got to say.
It always is. People's first Christmas that they spend with me, they are typically shocked.
Yeah, and I guess they shouldn't be because as we've discussed, you're the one that probably looks most like an elf in our whole office.
Yeah, in most places.
You definitely have the size and I reckon you've got some facial features as well that are kind of elfish.
Probably. I don't have the pointy ears though, so.
No.
Yeah.
Didn't you once dress up as an elf?
No, I was asked to dress up as Elf on the Shelf.
Yeah.
But fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, no elf costume could be procured at the time. So that did not eventuate.
Yeah, probably none in your size, I guess. So.
I think just none, period. Christmas, finding an adult elf costume at Christmas time is...
Adult, I think, is maybe an overestimation. Small child's...
just because you're like a string bean.
But we've always had, I think you're actually the first female hire we've had, and we've had all just, developers and stuff, and kind of Christmas goes by and no one really cares. So this is the first year we've actually had someone push for a budget to get Christmas kind of deck. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm glad you got a budget and I'm looking forward to the stuff when they arrive.
I am too.
Yeah, it'd be cool.
And I'm going to make everybody help decorate too.
Yeah, well, you did a great job. I got to say, when I turned 40, it was really nice coming in and seeing all the balloons, and Ryan almost passed out on the ground from blowing up all the balloons.
He was glaring at me and Dan initially saying, I'm not going to participate. And then he got up and did more than any of us. So I had to actually confiscate the bag of balloons from him because he was just not stopping. Yeah,
so I got to say, it has been nice having a woman's touch around the office. And
gosh, thanks. Isn't that swell?
It is swell. Look, I don't really dish out the compliments hard and fast. So just take them.
Is that what that was? It was a bit of a backhanded compliment. I think.
It was as close as you're going to get.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, but yes, look, I am looking forward to Christmas, and it'll be better being in the Christmas spirit with some of your decorations and stuff around the office. It should be nice. Cool.
Thanks.
Well, let's introduce our guest in. We've got a very special guest today. He has a PhD in safety science, is an adjunct fellow of the Safety Science Innovation Lab at Griffith University in Queensland. He's previously held senior health and safety positions in several large organisations. He currently applies cutting-edge safety science as founder and managing director of both ForgeWorks and Safety Futures. However, our listeners probably best know him as the co-host of the very popular Safety of Work podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. David Provan.
Good afternoon. Jason,
yes, it is afternoon. Even in Perth, it is afternoon. Yes.
It's that now after 18 months of COVID and doing so much international work, I've got a fairly good time zone calculator in my head now, which is good.
Yeah. It's nice to hear someone from Melbourne say they're thinking about Perth because most people just forget that we exist.
They do, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's nice.
Yeah, and all that office talk, that was all quite foreign to me as someone who has spent more than 270 days lockdown in the last 18 months. So it's even strange to be looking at two people sitting in the same room in an office setting
without a mask on
without
and all the rest.
without a mask or something.
Yeah. We've certainly been fortunate to in some ways anyway.
Yeah, I'm glad we escaped that social experiment.
Absolutely. So David, can you tell us what podcasts you like to listen to?
Yeah, well, look, present company excluded, your podcast, my podcast that I do with Drew Ray. I actually catch up on a lot of my sports via podcasts, and also like some big fan of Cautionary Tales, Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, and some of those storytelling podcasts. Yeah, and that's probably the scale of it. There's so much content these days. I think by the time I've got 3 or 4 shows, that's about all I get time for.
Yeah, got some crossover there with lots of our guests and what we like to listen to as well. Now, obviously, as Jason mentioned, you are the co-host of the Safety of Work podcast. I'm sure that many of our listeners are already familiar with that, but for those who haven't heard about it, could you tell them what it's all about?
Yeah, so I went pretty late in my career back to university and did PhD research with Professor Sidney Decker and Dr. Drew Ray at Griffith University. And my PhD research was what is the role of a safety professional, and really got underneath for 4 or 5 years exploring the job as objectively as I could, the job that I'd done for my whole career. And one of the key findings there was that the profession didn't have an evidence-based narrative or justification for a lot of the things that we were advising and facilitating in our organizations around safety. And this may be true of psychological safety and well-being as well. And so when I finished that, sort of bailed Drew up one day and said, well, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And we can't just keep telling professionals to go and read journal articles. And so that was the idea. The idea was, well, we'll do the work for the professionals. We'll get a question that's relevant to organizations and safety, and we'll go find some research papers, and we'll do our best to explain them one paper at a time. And sort of a couple of years and 85 episodes later, it seems to be meeting a need, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's I'm in two minds about you going to a fortnightly cadence with your podcast, Dave. On one hand, I'm sad that I only get 1 episode a fortnight and not 2. But I also like that we're catching up to you in terms of podcast episodes. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a labor of love, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's quite a bit behind the scenes that I'm sure people appreciate with preparation and with production, and yeah, so we just got to the point where it was just becoming a little bit too rushed each week. So
yeah, we're talking off air obviously before, Dave, that we obviously took the easy way out and just thought, let's have a guest on and ask them the questions rather than do any prep work ourselves. You guys do a heap of prep for that, and I think the safety profession really appreciates it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, thanks for that.
So can you tell us about your professional career then?
Yeah, so I did do an undergraduate psychology degree a long time ago. Probably everything I learned at the time is since been disproven. But at the time, health and safety, workplace health and safety, was becoming a big topic in communities, in politics, inside organizations. And so there were quite a lot of jobs going. So I got a graduate workplace health and safety officer job, and then just went from there. And safety is the only job I've ever done. I spent 17 or 18 years in a professional career, 3 separate organizations, and then a bit over 4 years ago decided that working inside large organizations was not for me anymore, and sort of started working on my own ideas and working for myself. So I've been fortunate to work in oil and gas, in construction, in rail, get involved in activities all over high risk or high hazard activities and assets all around the world. And now keep getting the opportunity to do that with lots of different interesting clients.
So I think that probably people who haven't studied psychology probably don't have an appreciation of the amount of research methodology that you actually have to learn as part of the undergraduate degree. Do you think, like, did that sort of influence your decision to do the PhD and actually look at, I guess look into that issue of scientific literacy or access to research in the safety profession?
Yeah, I think psychology really suited my personality, just constantly trying to understand the way the world works. I think my parents used to say, like, when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, I'd rather just sit down and pull, like, the T volume of World Book Encyclopedia off the shelf and just start randomly reading through, like, one letter of, did you have those? Did you have the bookshelf of all the World Book encyclopedias? And I'll just pull a random letter off and just start reading page to page about different things. And so psychology really suited me with the research methods and thinking about questions that we didn't know the answer to, and then trying to work out how we might figure out the answer. And I think that's what I really enjoyed about safety early on in my career, that just, it was so complex and so variable. It was touching every part of an organization. It was every person, every task, every day, in every situation. It was dynamic. It was changing. It was time in the office, time in the field. And it just seemed amazingly interesting to me. So that's, and then I'd done I went on, did a master's in health science, and then I did an MBA, and then it was kind of this cycle of every couple of years, go back and do something else at university.
Yeah. We've all experienced that bug.
I don't know. I don't know.
You? No, you went straight through, didn't you?
I think my parents may still have the old Encyclopedia Britannica on their shelf at home, and I'm pretty sure I could sell you a mint copy.
I'd probably be up for that. But it is a bit addictive. I think it's either university or tattoos. It's kind of like
yeah. And I got to say, unlike the two of you, maybe, although you haven't gone back for further study.
I have so.
Oh yeah, you did that. Yeah, safety management system course or something.
Yeah, it was a graduate certificate, I think, and I had to do some like government diploma stuff as well.
Yeah, when I finally finished my master's dissertation in 2007, after delaying it for 2 years, I should have finished it in 2005. That was it. I sometimes have nightmares about going back and studying. No, very happy to learn on the job these days, David, as compared to learning in a classroom environment. But obviously now you've transitioned, as you said, you had enough of working within large organizations, and now you're consulting, and you do that under the banner of ForgeWorks. So can you tell us a little bit about ForgeWorks and why you created it, what it's all about?
Yeah, sure. So ForgeWorks is a safety and operational risk consulting business, and sort of at the moment we're trying to make that transition from professional services organization to technology company, and got some really exciting things that are sort of in the market now, and also sort of like on the development roadmap for that. So look, I think so I got to the point in my career, like I said earlier, after 17 or 18 years inside companies, that I sort of felt like, and feeling about mid-career, so early 40s, but at the time, late 30s, going, well, maybe halfway through my career, if I keep working in these same sorts of roles inside these same sorts of organizations, how much am I going to learn from that? Like, and I knew that I would learn, but I didn't think I'd learn as much as if I tried to reinvent myself or really try to do something different. So, and at the same time, I'd never really felt like there was a consulting business that I could go to. And, there was lots of individual safety consultants who I really respected and used a lot. But as far as consulting companies go, like, and not to, criticize any of those, big four consulting companies or any of the other big safety consultancies, I really felt like there was an organization in the market that that I would just want to have a long-term partnership with. So I felt that there was an opportunity to try to grow a brand into that market, and that was a ForgeWorks brand, and we invested a lot in sort of setting up the brand and and mobilizing it. And we had some really good international contracts and projects and lots happening and really strong growth. And then kind of COVID. So 18, nearly, well, going to be 2 years ago shortly. And so that sort of led us to kind of reinventing ourselves, launching another organization as well, and sort of making that decision that, you know, a tech, you sort of need to be a digital business now. You know, it's not scalable and the digital technology is so available and it's so good now. It's so high fidelity that I don't think the scale happens with people in the same impactful way.
Yeah, I mean, even learning platforms, right? I mean, there's little difference between consuming something over Teams live, as most people have had to during the pandemic, because you couldn't do training live, versus, you know, something that's pre-recorded and then it's scalable because it's not people's time that we're talking about.
Yeah.
That's similar to you. Obviously, we made the decision to go from a consulting business to a technology business back in 2018 and haven't looked back. It's great. But tell us, you said you do have already something in market. I'm sure I've come across it, but for our listeners, you know, what is the first thing that you've released?
Yeah, so we worked really hard. We were doing a lot of organizational strategy building and as part of so health and safety strategy projects. And as part of that, you'd always do a diagnostic of the organization. Where's the organization at? Where does the organization want to be? What are the ways to help it get there or help the people inside it lead that? And so that ended up us building our own framework in September or so, 2020, a bit over maybe 15 months ago, we released this blueprint for improving the safety of work, about a 40 page or so blueprint, and said, here it is, here's what we think, here's what's in all the contemporary safety theory and research around how to do this well. And then we started doing lots of assessments, what I say manually at first, lots of interviews, lots of focus groups, lots of site visits. And again, COVID, we initially didn't want to develop a survey tool, a questionnaire tool, because I think going back to Jarell's point about psychology, knowing the use and misuse of things like survey instruments, I didn't want to sort of buy into a lot of the rubbish instruments that are out there. So we sort of took us 12 months working with Griffith. We had 5 or 6 different false starts, and just until we got to the point where we felt that we had a question set that gave us some insights into people. So we've got, you know, the web app and the digital version of that survey and the analytics around that and the reporting around that. And, you know, very soon we'll have sort of self-service functionality around that and pulsing capability and a whole lot of kind of things that organizations can use to get feedback from their people about their approach to safety management. So yeah, that's in the hands of real people, real paying customers now. The first dozen or so there, and you know, we've got some pretty ambitious goals for 2022 to get people all around the world onto that platform, 12 languages, and
it's amazing, like you say, the scale that you can reach when you go down the technology route rather than the people power route. Little loss in fidelity, but these days, like you say, it's actually pretty good what you can deliver with technology versus the face-to-face.
Yeah, and also we're finding it's really interesting as well, because we're finding you know, we thought things like interviews were high fidelity, but as you know, there's so much researcher bias in things as well. So, you know, once you do one interview and then you form a view and then you go into the next interview, you're kind of reinforcing your opinions from the first interview in the second interview. And as we started to do some sort of independent work of getting different people in different focus groups and trying to do a survey with one group and then doing focus groups and interviews with the other group, we actually realized that what we thought with our interviewing processes and our focus group process, what we thought were quite high fidelity processes were probably also quite biased, maybe even more so than the right survey instrument. So, you know, I think that's why so much research, I think, is mixed methods.
Yeah.
Which is what we like to do now. We like to do a survey and then a couple of focus groups and a few interviews as well.
Yeah, and that's common methodology when conducting a psychosocial risk assessment, for example, as well. Yeah. Hey, the other venture that you founded is the Safety Futures. Can you tell us a bit about what that's all about?
Yeah, so Safety Futures Safety Futures wasn't, but designing a professional development program for health and safety professionals was something that I started thinking about before I started my PhD. So 2012, 2013. At the time, I had 289 health and safety people working for me inside an oil and gas organization.
Wow. Yeah.
And everyone would come to me, and I'd had a master's in safety. I had an MBA and all this. Everyone would come to me and say, what can I do to advance my career? What's good professional development? Should I go to uni? And I'd be like, well, unis, they don't really make you better professionals. No disrespect to, that's not what universities are there to do. And it's like, well, a short course on like communication skills or conflict resolution or something. And I just really felt that there was nothing in the market, that there was nothing available to me to grow the capability of my safety team. So that was when I thought that was sort of part of the inspiration for going and doing my PhD on the topic of the role. And then it was on the back burner. You start a business, you get busy, you start doing projects, and then you never get a break. But when we got first lockdown in the start of 2020, we sort of had a number of projects cancelled, and I kind of went, now or never. Let's do this. And so started designing this advanced safety professional practice program, and started really broadly, and won't bore you with the details, but it ended up being sort of 25 modules, and we run it as a boot camp over 15 weeks. And so we launched our first program in February this year. We've now run 5 programs, 3 in-house programs for some very large international organizations, and 2 public programs. Both the public programs we sold out with 100 spots on each, and we'd add another maybe 150 people through in-house programs. So it's been amazing to have 350 or so health and safety professionals from about 30 countries through that program. And then I was also kept getting asked, what can we do to train our leaders, our like operations managers, supervisors? And I'd worked more than a decade ago with a colleague who's a partner in the Safety Futures organization in doing frontline leadership training. And Ralph Shreve, he's gone on to train more than 10,000 supervisors. So we launched in June our frontline leadership version, which is a 10-module, 12-week version. And we've got already more than 500 enrollments in that program for 2022.
Amazing.
Across 6 different programs with 100 spots in each. So that's sort of 60% or 70% already filled. And it's just an amazing experience to what we call a digitally enabled interactive workplace-based learning experience, which sounds like a mouthful, but we deliver the content through a cool platform. We have weekly webinars and like lectures, tutorials, weekly webinars and learning groups, and people do practical activities in their workplace and reflect on it. So it's cool, and they get the book.
That's a real hard copy book. Look at that.
Yeah, which is only available to participants on the program at the moment. And
is it signed by you, Dave?
It can be. It can be signed. But no, that was also the first. That was actually kind of a cool. So that's my COVID. That's what gave birth to. Finally wrote a book during COVID.
Yeah, that's a thick one too.
It is.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Much thicker than Clive's, I got to say. His baby during COVID. Yeah. Yeah, but I think similar to you, Dave, we like experimenting with different mediums and how do you, do things at scale and, educate a broad audience around the world. And you also had to go at doing a online conference or of some sort through ForgeWorks, didn't you? Yeah,
we did a face-to-face workshop in February 2020, a Safety 2 in Practice workshop. We brought out Professor Erik Holnagel from Denmark, and many of the listeners probably know Erik. And, we had this idea of once a year we'd do this event. And then COVID, a bit of a theme, isn't it? I was just thinking the other day that, I see people walking around holding, with masks and holding masks, and that doesn't even seem strange anymore. But if I went back 2 years and saw people walking around with masks on, I'd be like, where am I? What is this? But anyway, I forgot the question. Sorry, Jason.
Yeah, the live conference that you're in.
Oh, yeah. So then this year we thought, well, we'll do something anyway. And at the start of this year, it looked like we might be able to do a hybrid event. The borders were opening and shutting every second week. But we went to this live. We decided to try and do it. Well, we decided to do a live stream global safety summit. So TV studio style, 8 hours of live streaming all around the world. And I think at one point we had about 3,500 people online viewing that. We had Professor Sidney Dekker, we had Dr. Todd Conklin, and a range of practitioners and sharing stories from sort of around the world. And then in only a month or two ago, we did a live stream event into Brazil in live translation in Portuguese. So again, we had Sydney and Todd and others doing what we're doing now with, which is amazing. Someone super talented person who can listen in one ear to the English and speak at the same time a few seconds later in the Portuguese. And so we did a live stream, live translation event over 2 days into Brazil.
Yeah, that was with Hector?
Hugo.
Yeah, Joel's been on his podcast before.
Oh,
I didn't
cool.
get it.
Awesome.
I didn't get an invite.
Ah, fair enough.
Just don't have my profile, Jason.
Joel's the favorite. Everyone knows it.
So so we've tried a couple of different things. And most things have gone okay, fortunately.
Yeah, I mean, that's the entrepreneur in you, right? Like you have something like COVID get in the way, and then you think about other ways how do we still get out the message and engage people and everything, which is fantastic.
So you gave us some numbers of like the number of safety professionals that you've had through your Safety Futures training so far, which is very impressive. What would you say is their current level of knowledge about psych health and safety? Or is that something that you look at?
Yeah, we do talk a lot about it because it's such an important topic for organizations and, and communities, governments and professions. And so it comes up a lot when we're talking about different aspects of the professional practice, whether it's risk management, whether it's management systems, whether it's communication, and so it comes up a lot of the time. But we don't have any specific content in our course around it because I never felt that I was the one who was appropriate to be teaching people about this. And so, but we do talk about it a lot. There's a lot of willingness to learn and try to understand what organizations can legitimately be doing in this space that is going to be helpful. So there is a strong appetite for this amongst the health and safety profession from what we've experienced this year.
Yeah, you haven't found any pushback on it and say, look, this is the role of org psychs or HR?
The pushback that we get is mainly related to people feeling like it's not the role of organizations to intervene in this space. So that's, it's personal business. Organizations shouldn't be overreaching into people's personal lives. We shouldn't be doing anything about this. They're the people. That seems to be the narrative of behind the pushback, not because it's someone else's problem within the organization. It's health and safety people who don't think it's an organizational not responsibility, but issue.
Do you think that's maybe due to confusion around, say, mental illness symptoms and psychosocial hazards?
Yes. Because work does create psychosocial hazards, absolutely does. And organizations should not shy away from the fact that work does create genuine psychosocial hazards. But people conflate psychosocial hazards with the broader mental illness space for some conditions which are maybe not so much caused by psychosocial hazards and more caused by genetics or other environmental factors which are diagnosed conditions and treatable conditions. And I don't know whether I think workplaces should be inclusive of people with all of those sorts of illnesses. But yeah, I agree. The way that you frame that, absolutely, that misunderstanding is probably what's causing
Yeah, it is something that we have discussed previously on the podcast, probably a number of times. I think it's caused by the public health approach to mental health, mental illness, and then that being translated into a workplace environment. And then that's confused with, well, actually the employer's obligation is to create a healthy and safe work environment that's free, or where hazards are identified and risks are reduced to as low as reasonably practicable. And that is physical and psychosocial. But the role of the organization is not to help people manage a mental illness. It is to, they should be accommodating people with a mental illness like they would anyone with a physical injury, but it's not their role to treat someone with a mental illness. And so, I think it is something to do with the public health approach, potentially confusing what the employer's obligations are and the role of the health and safety professional in that too.
And I think also just a real focus on the individual, even, at a societal level, that, mental health is something that sits within the individual, and there's not really, to get on one of my bandwagons, there's not really good recognition of social determinants of health as they relate to mental health, sort of in I guess, general community understanding of mental illness, if we want to use that language. So it's sort of makes sense that carries over into the workplace as well.
Yeah. And I think even just the term psychosocial, like a lot of health and safety professionals don't understand. So we're not talking about mental illnesses caused by genetic predisposition or individual kind of circumstances or lifestyle choices. We're talking about, environmental conditions that are causing these things. And therefore, we can manage those hazards like we would with any other physical hazards. And that is getting down to the root cause and dealing with them systemically.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think having that language, the way that you've both just described it there, is really what the profession needs, like social determinants, environmental factors, lifestyle choices, clinical conditions, all of these different ways of understanding, the breadth of what is a broad and complex topic, just like all of the language we have around physical workplace hazards, developing that same model and language for these hazards, like what you guys do really well at Flourish, is helpful, because then organizations and the safety professionals can find their part of that puzzle, or their part of that they really need to be addressing and working on legitimately. And I agree with your other point about the public health approach. Like, we see organizations, when they want to approach this in their organization, they do things like bring these amazing charities in, like Beyond Blue and all of these sorts of things, which are there to kind of support illness in community, in society. And that's not really what organizations should be doing. It's like, yeah, exactly like what you said. It's, what are the work conditions? What are the social conditions? What's that doing to what hazards, what psychosocial hazards is that creating? And then what is the organization doing about that?
Yeah, I mean, if we put it into a space that you're very familiar with, Dave, you don't expect a company to offer sports massages to employees like on a weekly basis, unless you're an athlete, right? But perhaps that's maybe part of the role. But someone working in a manual role, you don't have the masseuse, going jump on and, I'll give you a rub down.
And I think that's the thing. Like, I didn't have I was quite naive, and still am in a lot of ways quite ignorant of this whole domain. It's not something that I claim to have expertise in. But that was always why I probably didn't venture too far in here if I went back 5 years when I was last inside an organization, because, people were seeing this as something like, lunchtime yoga classes, fruit bowls, subsidized gym memberships, and then once a year, some resilience training or something, coping with stress training or something like that. And I never really felt like, that was like putting posters up for safety or something like that. I didn't feel that was actually doing anything of benefit for, surely it was doing some things of benefit, but I didn't feel like that was what organizations should be doing.
Yeah. We, as we describe it, again, putting it in the language your listeners would be familiar with, we talk about the hierarchy of controls, and it's really down to that bottom level. If we talk about resilience training, you're really talking about either an administrative control or a PPE control when it comes to psychosocial risk.
Yeah, and it is an important control for some roles where they are necessarily exposed to, traumatic events or, at risk of vicarious trauma or that sort of thing, then having the psychological PPE is a really necessary function for their role, but not for people who are just dealing with poorly structured bureaucracy and, lack of role clarity and those sorts of things.
Yeah, and we definitely believe there's a bit of both, right? Yeah, we do need to equip the individual to be able to protect themselves against less than ideal circumstances, but that then it doesn't absolve the employer of their obligations to create a healthy environment where people don't get ill. In fact, Professor Tony LaMontagne went as far to say it's unethical for a company to offer resilience training unless they first look at the psychosocial hazards and make sure that they've reduced that risk to a LARP.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like, I'd sort of agree with that unethical stuff. It's kind of like giving someone training in how to apply a tourniquet to their arm that gets cut off because they don't want to put a guard around the machine. Like, it's just the wrong end of the incident.
Yeah, and I think we find that when we're able to make those analogies to physical safety examples, that really people sort of get the point that we're making a lot easier then.
Yeah, you see a lot of light bulb moments.
Yeah, definitely. If somebody goes to a lot of festivals in their time off, does that mean that we don't give them ear defenders when they're exposed to noise at work? No, we don't. We take control of the hazards that they're exposed to at work.
Yeah. And we see it. And so, and workplaces should do, I think, a lot more heavy lifting in this space. Like, I think, I get that it's hard, but like so many times every week, I see people who are with unrealistic pressures on their work, like it's getting sent something at 6 p.m. at night and expecting a response back by 7:30 p.m. at night, and people, probably waking up the next morning dreading opening up their inbox for what's in it, or dreading having a meeting with their manager because of how their manager kind of provides feedback to them or something. And I think that there's these things about workload and pressure and communication and support. There's so much inside an organization that creates so many psychosocial hazards that organizations just typically ignore. And we see it whenever a whistleblower comes out, that the organizations, and this is probably an unfair generalization, but it appears as though lots of organizations just throw this stuff in the too hard basket and don't try to do anything proactive about it.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really forced the hands of regulators and legislators to adjust, obviously, our legislation here in Australia and draft regulations around psychosocial risk management. And, Safe Work New South Wales has been the first state to bring out an industry agnostic code of practice in this space as well. And so it's going to be pretty hard for employers to hide. It's not going to be, it being too hard is not going to be a justification anymore. There's going to be plenty of really good evidence out there, and we're probably not helping employers either by giving them a tool, which makes it really easy to do this stuff as well.
Yeah, well, I think and otherwise, I think regulators will keep stepping in. I'm not sure you will know. Is it France where it's illegal to send your employees an email after hours or something?
It's been around for a little while. Yeah,
I think in France it's around for a little while. I think maybe it's just come into a few other countries as well.
Oh, it might be Portugal's just introduced it, maybe.
Yeah. And look, they do take it pretty serious over in France. There was a couple of directors in the last year or two that were put in jail for a culture of bullying and harassment. So the directors held responsible for that, where they had a number of suicides there. So they take it pretty seriously. What's going to be really interesting though is I was speaking to Michael Toomer about this actually at the AIHS conference they just had around workplace mental health, and asking him about, is it going to take some cases that aren't related to, say, bullying and harassment and sexual harassment, but maybe more around work overload to get companies to start taking this seriously? Because bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, I think everyone would morally go, yeah, that's wrong, and we don't want that in our workplace. But things like workload, it seems like companies are very fine in many instances to just keep piling on people. And looking at the Safe Work Australia workers' compensation statistics, I think it's something like 20% of all psychological injuries come down to work overload. It's not bullying and harassment, it's just having too much to do.
Yeah, I think there's more for less continuous approach in organizations is, I don't think you come across anyone who doesn't say that they're busy. And I think if you ask people, are you more busy now than you were a year ago, even COVID aside, I think when you look at the productivity stats about people have basically replaced all of their commuting time with work time, replaced their before breakfast, after dinner time, where maybe they used to unwind on the couch watching TV, are back in their study doing work, or put the kids to bed and doing more work, and everyone's got permanent studies set up in their house. And I think, cases would help. I think it'll be like anything. Those first couple of cases are just going to be painful for the people involved, because the companies are going to throw everything at the defense of that, which it always happens. It happens in safety, and it's kind of unethical as well. Like but hey, look, we see it everywhere. We see it in our own Australian federal government around claims of sort of sexual harassment and abuse and things like that. Like the liability management that organizations kind of go to is just so hard for the individual. So I think cases will help, but I feel sorry for the first couple of people involved in those cases, who are the first ones to put their hand up and say, this is unreasonable.
Yeah, well, I'm aware that the regulator in the UK and the Union for Higher Education Professionals is looking at doing something in that space around workload specifically, not around bullying. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that in the coming months.
Yeah, when you speak to, as I do with, my adjunct role with the Safety Science Innovation Lab at Griffith University, obviously with the loss of international students in lots of parts of the world with border closures, there's been lots of jobs lost in universities, and so lots of teaching workloads and research workloads and admin workloads so have all gone, onto sort of core permanent staff members and that now. So I think you'd find anyone in that sort of higher education setting anywhere in the world that used to rely on international students, they might be doing 50% more than they were expected to.
Yeah, not calling out any industry specifically, but higher education was not in a great place before the pandemic, and now it's obviously they're asking to do more with less, as a lot are. I like, or I don't like what you're saying, but I definitely resonate with what you're saying around the working from home, and we know that you and Melbourne had the worst of it with the longest lockdown in the world. But whether it's working from home and companies going, oh, people have great flexibility now, or is it living at work, not being able to disconnect from, what you're actually doing.
Yeah. And I think that there's, which way does it bleed, and I think, employers, and again, speaking in generalizations here, employers are happy to have work bleed into home life, but they're not happy to have home life bleed into work.
Yeah. And it's a good point. I think, it's a really, and I'm probably not really best placed to talk about this sort of working for myself or leading a business. So, I think if it's I feel like I've got a really huge blur between life and work, because lots of the things I do at work are, I'm so passionate about them that I would do them on a Sunday because I find them interesting or enjoyable. So I think what I think it is with that thing is when it isn't actually something that a person wants to do. Like, I've got to prioritize this thing that I don't want to do over something that I want to be doing in my life. Then I think outside of the normal hours of work, so is where it becomes, I think, a real problem for people. And that's probably I don't want to say most people, it's too much of a generalization, but that would be how I do it. Does the person want their life to be different than they feel the organization is making it for them?
I mean, it's also different being a business owner as well, because you're going to still reap the benefits of whatever work you do whenever you do it. Where if you're, a salaried employee doing those extra hours and not being compensated for them, and if you don't have any other ways for the business to compensate you for those additional hours.
Yeah, I'm only laughing a little bit because this idea of reaping the benefits and salaried employees and business owner. There are a few words used in that sentence that didn't quite mesh together for me, and I was just going, being a salaried employee. Yes,
Joel has no idea, Dave.
The
what
grass
we go through. Yeah.
the grass is always green. But no, you're exactly
I have
right.
no aspirations to business ownership.
No.
My dad was a small business owner my whole life, and many of my other family members as well. I know what it looks like, and I have no desire for that whatsoever. I'm quite happy being on a salary.
I do say to people, not in a feel sorry for me kind of way, but it is something that in the last few years never ever worked harder for less money in my career, but passionate about what I do every day. So you got to make those trade-off decisions. So.
Yeah. So one of the things that you're obviously passionate about, Dave, is to build up the profession's capabilities, right? So we're talking about psych health and safety here specifically. Thinking about health and safety generalists, what sort of competencies do you think that they are going to need in this new world where things like ISO 45003 is out, where we've got new regulations dealing with psychosocial hazards is out, to help them to be able to partner with their organizations to deal with this successfully? Yeah,
look, I think the health and safety profession is I think a logical place for this responsibility to sit inside organizations. When we think, you can talk about being in human resources, but I don't know whether human resources have the sort of the frameworks and the I don't want to say access, but the understanding of work that the health and safety organization would have. So I think it's a logical place to sit. I think the literacy in this area needs a massive increase, like for me included, me absolutely included, to actually know what this cause and effect model kind of is inside organization. Like what are the psychosocial hazards, or so what are the drivers of certain types of psychosocial hazards? What are the different impacts on individuals? How do those impacts vary across maybe different individuals? Because I assume from one of the differences here is compared with physical safety, in my understanding, you can tell me that I'm wrong, please do. But my layman's interpretation, if two people were to fall out off a ledge 5 meters in the air, their physical injury impacts would probably be quite similar. If two people were to be exposed to the same psychosocial hazards, I have this understanding that the impacts on different people can be quite different, which is why I think organizations hide behind the fact of, well, we'll just help people to cope more, because some people seem to be able, because Fred or Mary, who sits over there, does more work than you and doesn't complain. So I guess that's when we think about the literacy and the capability of WHS professionals, is sort of to understand those determinants, those hazards, those impacts, those individual factors, and kind of understand that risk space. That would be how I'd see the starting point.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, because Joel's been dealing with that recently. We had a client who wanted to do a top-down risk assessment, of psychosocial hazards. And, we had to say, well, no, actually employee perception of psychosocial hazards count actually more so than your desktop research or your top-down view of what you perceive to be reasonable.
Because it is, the role of individual differences, as you say, David, is so significant. I think probably you can look at it as rather than, what damage will occur if we expose, if we push someone off a height, yes, we know that, the likely damage that will occur. But if we look at it from the perspective of, how much weight can somebody lift? And then you've got a broad range of capability there, and you don't look at, who's the muscliest dude in the group and then assume that everybody's going to have the same capability to lift. You actually look at, well, what's the average, or what's the minimum requirement for this role, and that's where we actually set the benchmark there, not at the best performer.
Yeah, I like that analogy. that's a much better one. That's a much, yeah. So I think that's a good contrast to the heights one, and also a good sort of example for the individual differences. And yeah, I just think that there's a whole awakening that needs to happen. And I think maybe when I talk about organizations, sometimes I sort of talk chicken and egg. Like, someone's got to break the cycle. Someone's got to awaken first. And so I think this is one of these things that that if the workplace health and safety profession can get itself organized and aware around these topics, can provide a whole lot of support to their workforce. And I agree with you that perception is probably the most important thing. When we do our survey that I mentioned earlier around the capacity, which the capacity of the organization to manage the safety of work, we get organizations who say to us, but it's only the perception, it's not reality. And it's like, well, if you believe that individuals making decisions impact safety, then the logics that they're telling themselves and the perceptions that they have is actually what informs the decisions that they make. So we had one debate with a CFO, because the workforce had fed back that they didn't feel like there was enough resources for safety. And the executive management said, well, that's simply not true. We have a dedicated safety budget. Anytime anyone's ever asked us for something to do with safety, we've given it to them. It's like, well, it doesn't matter what you think is true or not true. This is what people experience. This is what people experience in the organization. So I guess it's a little bit like that with psychosocial hazards. It's what's the individual experience of, the work conditions.
Yeah, and that's something that we've had to work around as well. I mean, psychosocial risk assessments by a survey are pretty dumb typically. Is workload high, low, or somewhere in between? Is autonomy high, low, in between? Is supervisor support high, low, in between? These sorts of things, right? But people have different preferences. Like, I know some people who love to be busy all the time, and if they weren't, that would actually be more of a stressor than if they were flat out. Same thing like with job control. Some people want to check their brain at the door. They don't want to think when they come to work. But automatically we would generally assume high workload, low control, that's a recipe for disaster in terms of work-related stress. And so, yeah, and that's why we had to come up with a different way of doing psychosocial risk assessments, taking more into account the individual impact of hazard exposure, rather than just this assumption that some of these hazards automatically lead to a negative work experience.
So I guess from a motivation perspective, what do you feel would help people in a safety function to take a more proactive role in psych health and safety in their organizations?
I think, again, these generalizations, I'm always a bit nervous about just generalizing, but I think the confidence in the knowledge, like I think it's a confidence in the awareness around this and the understanding. Like I think the motivation is there. I think it's such an important topic in businesses now, from boardrooms to senior management in mass media outlets. I think every organization that we work with is doing something, has some kind of plan in relation to this. Most of the time, based on this conversation, that's probably an ill-informed plan, but this happens in safety too. People want to do something about even physical safety, and it's just, let's just throw activity at this. And I think education's got to come before activity, and I think that's where it is now. So I think what I like with what you've done with your 45,003 training, free training, and all this sort of stuff is, I think the education piece is the first piece, and hopefully the profession is pretty motivated to become educated, and it's a matter of just having the access to that education and knowing where it is. That's what I'd hope anyway.
Yeah, would you consider putting a 26 module on your Safety Futures course around psych health and safety?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Yeah, maybe we should do that together, because I mean, the thing that you can't really maybe promote an evidence-based approach and then go off and teach stuff that you're probably not the person to teach. So even in the risk management, the physical aspect of the risk management in our program was authored by another colleague on my team, Avitsa Ninik, who's a risk engineer and professional process safety engineer. Forgotten more stuff about risk management than I'll ever know, and so we've sort of had this deference to expertise model around the framework. So yeah, sure, right. All right.
Well, Joelle's awesome at writing content. If you want a real organizational psychologist, we have one here on salary, which is great. But no, that sounds good. Okay, look, you heard it here first, listeners. 2022 Safety Futures course. So we'll have a module on psych health and safety. There you go. Written by Joelle.
I love writing scripts.
Guest lectured. But I think it is something that's really, I mean, it's mainstream now, and it'll be one of these things where I just hope that the health and safety profession isn't kind of left behind again. Given the access to information that is available if people just go looking.
Yeah, and I think like you said, this actually sits really well within health and safety. HR have had their go at doing workplace mental health. And they've done it to, the skill set that they've got. Let's get lunch and learns in, keynotes, mental health first aid, run an EAP, have a tissue box handy, that sort of thing. But health and safety now actually need to bring their skills around risk into the game and understand, hey, there's hazards here. And if our role as a profession is to make sure that people leave the workplace the same way they entered, or in a better place even, then we really need to understand and be managing those risks.
Yeah, and I think also, in no disrespect, I mean, to the HR profession, but the lens with which they look at the organisation is not the same as the lens with which the workplace health and safety profession look at the organisation. So the health and safety profession looks at work first and goes, what's the work that people have to do and what's the hazards created by it? The health and safety function look at the people first. And so then go, what do I need to do to the people? So hopefully the health and safety function goes, what do I need to do to the work? And if I change the work, I change the hazards that emerge when people interact with that work. It's not a slight against the profession. They're doing the best with what they've got and their knowledge base and their skill set. But this is why health and safety and HR need to work together, because together then they actually have a broader view, complete picture. Yeah, I agree entirely.
So what would you say, speaking to the safety professionals in our listenership, what are the benefits for an organisation when their OHS function does have psych health and safety capabilities?
Oh, look, I think I think it's a huge benefit. I'm sure you've done podcasts and looked at maybe I'll step back from that answer. I think if the role of the health and safety profession is to improve the safety of work, for the people who work for that organisation, then this has to be part of what it means to improve the safety of the work. And so if it has to be part of it, then the profession needs to have the capability to do it. And I mentioned once just before about deference to expertise. If I was the head of health and safety inside an organisation now, I'd have a psychologist reporting directly to me, just like I'd have, depending on the nature of the industry, a risk engineer or a chemical engineer, just like I'd have an environmental specialist or whatever else was within my remit. I think we saw during COVID the emergence of chief medical officers reporting to CEOs in some organizations. Obviously, that's, pandemic extreme, outside the capability of the WHS profession, but inside health and safety organizations, I'd expect to see growing employment of psychologists to do this well, to do it properly.
Yeah, and I guess what you're talking about there is having, within your safety team, you've got your generalists and then you've got your specialists, your subject matter expertise, and that's where you'd have that psych input as that subject matter expertise, I guess, to work with the generalist to embed into the SMS and into the risk management processes that are there.
Yeah, a good safety organisation, and this is one where I could talk forever on, given it was this topic of my PhD, sort of like the three-legged stool. Like you say, you've got your specialists who actually know the content of the individual content areas, major hazard categories or whatever you want to call it. Then you've got your advisory business partners, the people who liaise with, the management in the organization, understand the business context and draw in on that specialist advice. And then you've got your support services, the people who maintain the systems and the reporting and the administration of safety. And I think what happens is organizations get the admin and the general stuff and then forget that those people don't know what they're talking about when it comes to a lot of the specific hazards in the workplace, whether it's chemical, whether it's any other sorts of damaging energies or psychosocial. So have a look at your safety organization and your technical subject matter expert pool, and make sure you've got a subject matter expert for every major hazard that you've got in your organization, would be my advice.
Yeah, that's terrific advice. And it's definitely something we've spoken about before, given that around about 10% of all workers' compensation in Australia is due to psychological injuries. You'd have to think you'd probably want in a team of 10, at least one person who knew what they were talking about regarding psychosocial.
Yeah. I mean, it's becoming such an important issue. And as organizations will realize that they'll have less and less physical hazards, less and less manual work, much more automation. So you'll see this curve, you'll see this inflection point where that psychosocial hazards crosses 50% because we've engineered out most of the physical hazards. Most of the improvements in physical safety over the last 30 to 50 years, no offense to all of, probably offend the entire health and safety profession now, but most of those...
You do that most of the time anyway, don't you?
Well, okay, cool. As long as that's okay. I'll just blame it on Drew Ray but there's a view that you could argue that actually the reduction in risk has come from the engineering profession, not from the health and safety profession, to a large extent for physical safety risk. And the more we look into the safety work that is driven by the health and safety organisation, the more we realise that it's probably not doing a whole lot to genuinely reduce physical risk. And I think there'll be this inflection point as the engineering function and automation and digitalisation, as that progresses. No one on assembly lines now, everything will be 3D printed so robotics. So if you're looking really future, like in a decade's time, maybe 90% of your compensation claims are psychosocial related.
I think the other element to that is that, for the most part, psych hazards can't be eliminated. Whenever you've got a group of people working together, you're always going to have psych hazards that emerge at some point in time. So I guess it's just always there in potential. So it's a matter of knowing what to look for and when to look for it and when to respond. Yeah, how to respond.
The majority of our psych hazards at our office, Dave, are usually before 10 a.m. before Joelle's had her first coffee for the day. They're foreseeable risks, and we mitigate.
The majority of our psych hazards in our office are Jason. Let's just be clear about that.
And also 90% of the joy.
Yeah, if you say so.
I was going to say, Jason, given my predictions of just how in demand psychologists are going to be in companies, you might want to sort of slow down on the elf jokes and other comments.
Joelle gives it as good as gets it as good. Look, I don't know. It's past. It's too late now.
We're about even. Let's put it that way.
Good.
I'd say you've said more offensive things to me than vice versa.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, I value my life. That's why. Yeah. She's tiny, but dangerous, Dave. Hey, back to the topic at hand. We're talking about mental health. You obviously have a really great view of what's happening in the health and safety profession, locally and internationally. But if you had to think about the future of workplace mental health, which I know isn't your area of expertise, Dave. You've given a bit of a glum picture looking at the percentage of psychosocial or psychological injury, I should say. But what are your hopes for the future of workplace mental health?
I think there's a maybe a couple of things. I think organizations understanding the psychosocial hazards that their work creates, like genuinely at all levels of a business, I think is really important. Like understanding these things like these, and again, not knowing, and maybe I'll need more of an education from you guys, but whether it's workload, whether it's feedback, whether it's autonomy, whether it's inclusion, whatever those things are, organizations actually understanding that and having some robust management processes and monitoring and feedback processes around those that we would have for any other health and safety risks. So knowing what's going to cause the problem, knowing what we need to do to prevent it, monitoring it, reporting on it, discussing it in management meetings, assigning those accountabilities to people to make sure it's done. So my hope is that all of that doesn't take too long for organizations to do. And then probably a broader point, which is also a community point as well as an organizational point, is just making our organizations more inclusive and more tolerant of individual differences, just generally, and particularly in the mental health space. Like, I think we've been doing not fast enough and not enough with things like gender diversity and other aspects of individual differences. Like, I think we've been glacial in some of our advances on that, and it feels even more glacial on our tolerance for workplace mental health. Like, I mean, if someone applied for a job so think of our listeners, someone applied for your job in the team yesterday and goes, applies for a job in your team at the moment and goes, I've actually got this mental health, whatever it is, whether it's schizophrenia or something, and every now and then, completely out of the blue, I have a problem and I just need to stay in bed for 3 or 4 days. Don't know when it's going to happen, but it probably happens a couple of times a year. Now, that person's, if they disclose that, probably not going to get any job. And I think that's horrible for organizations to not be inclusive of the range of different sort of mental health conditions that people live their lives with. So they'd be the two things, I think, that organizations get their robust risk and management systems in place and just hurry up and be more inclusive.
Yeah, no, they're fantastic. And like you say, hopefully it's not glacial, these changes. Hopefully they come in sooner rather than later.
Well, and when we've got, 50% of adults in Australia will be diagnosed with some form of mental illness in their lifetime. I think that you don't have an option as an employer. Are you going to screen out 50% of your potential candidates? Then what does that do to your talent pool? Yeah. We could get very sidetracked and talk about how people can both be living with a chronic psychological disorder and also be high performers in the workplace. And, there are very reasonable adjustments that workplaces can make to take advantage of the talent those people can bring. Not to mention the commitment and the loyalty that they would bring to an organisation as well, who is willing to make those accommodations for them. So more pros than cons, I think, in actually advancing that inclusivity.
And I don't think it is a topic that we actually have focused on a whole episode of the Psych Health and Safety podcast. So maybe in 2022, something we can look at. Yeah.
So any listeners out there who are working in this field, hit us up. We'd like to have you on for a chat.
Terrific.
So David, do you have some parting words of advice to share with safety professionals who want to get more involved in psychological health and safety?
I think my parting words would be, not to be afraid of this area. Like, I started my career in psychology. It's fascinating. I mean, we're all human and we're sort of, incredibly interesting and complex people. And this space I don't think this space is a space to fear. It's not a space to ignore. It's a space to get educated on, so that you can understand the role that you can play as a professional and the role that your organization should be playing to kind of understand and manage these hazards. So, I guess whatever you're holding inside your head in terms of just not wanting to talk about it, the stigma around it, do what I'm going to do after this podcast, go educate yourself, about this area, because it's really important to do well, I think, now, and it will become increasingly more important in the future.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to seeing this as a topic on a soon-to-be released Safety at Work podcast.
Yeah, well, I'm going to educate myself. I'm going to go and find some research papers and and we might even do a little mini series on it or something if we can find a few good papers.
Oh, fantastic. Now it sounds like a great idea.
Does.
Yeah. Dave, it's been great having you on, mate. Really fantastic conversation. Few people in the world know the health and safety profession, the work of safety as well as you do. So really great to have you on and give that insight into the world of psych health and safety and what's required for the safety profession to get into this space.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun. That's gone fast.
Yeah. Time flies when you're having fun.
Hopefully it feels like it's gone fast for people listening.
I'm sure it has, mate. It's going to be an instant classic, no doubt.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that brings us to the end of the episode, listeners. Thank you for listening. Remember, we do record these over video, so you can check them out on the FlourishDX YouTube page, and we will release some clips on the FlourishDX LinkedIn page as well. Actually, Joel and I are really active on LinkedIn, and Dave's on LinkedIn a fair bit as well. So you could probably hit him up there. Where else could people find out more about your work? Because obviously you've got Safety Futures, you've got ForgeWorks.
Yeah, find me. LinkedIn's probably the easiest place to get hold of me if you want to reach out and sort of follow along what's going on. We've got some pretty exciting things for next year. We're going to launch our own YouTube channel under a new sort of a new little brand that's sort of
another brand.
Well, encompassing everything that that I'm involved in across ForgeWorks, Safety Futures, and the safety of work, and try to globalize and bring a lot of that to more people. So, yeah.
Okay, look out for that next year, guys, and or this year actually. This will come out, and this will be our first episode. I haven't told you that yet, David.
First episode of the new year.
First episode of the new year. Yeah.
So you're doing a Facebook then and doing like a meta thing, are you?
No, it's not nothing quite like that. No, but okay. Well, this will come out. Hopefully, if borders are open, I will be in the US when this comes out. If that all works. So.
Touch wood.
Yeah, we're not getting out of our state anytime soon.
No, we'll be here still in 12 months' time, and the borders will still be shut.
Yeah.
You guys do realize there was this thing called COVID that happened to most of the world.
What?
What now?
Great to have you on again, Dave. So that brings us to the end, listeners. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow FlourishDX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.